For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Sky Landgraf. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Programs here at We Are Moving the Needle. And I'm super pleased to welcome you all to today's Fix the Mix career workshop. If this is one of your first time joining us for these workshops, welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. These workshops are designed to connect our students, our early career professionals, our mid-career professionals, everyone with leaders from across the music industry for conversations on mentorship, career development, craft, all that good stuff. The hope is really to provide you with some tangible grounding and some practical questions that you're facing in your day to day and give you some insights and picture into how to build your career or navigate different pieces of the industry. So today we're going to be discussing Leslie's journey behind the board. She's a multifaceted, she's built a multifaceted career working in film and TV and games. And we're going to talk about how she's cultivated that, how she's cultivated her craft. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. I've done the work to kind of start to integrate those into our discussion questions today. And then we are going to have opportunity for live Q&A in the last 15 minutes or so. So please put things in the chat as we go along, and we'll have some time to get to all of those in due course. So without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce today's mentor. We have Leslie Ann Jones. Leslie is a legendary recording and mixing engineer whose career spans more than 4 decades at the forefront of music, film, and gaming. She is a 7-time Grammy Award winner, and she currently serves as the director of music recording and scoring at Skywalker Sound, where she has shaped the sound of some of the most iconic scores in cinema and video games. Since joining Skywalker Sound, she's recorded and mixed projects from an extraordinary range of artists, from Rosemary Clooney to the Kronos Quartet, while also contributing to award-winning soundtracks for film, television, and media, such as Civilization 6, Apocalypse Now, The Giver. The list goes on and on. I'm so excited. Welcome, Leslie. Yay!
Wonderful to be here.
Where are you calling? Do you want to share a little bit about where you're calling in from today?
Oakland, California. And it's my sort of office slash media room.
Beautiful. So as we get started, I'd love to kind of kick us off with a little bit of a journey question. I know your parents were artists, and I'm guessing that much of your love of music came from them. But what made you first want to become an engineer and step behind the board? And what was the impetus for diving into the technical side of music for you?
Well, probably the short answer would be I knew I could never make it as a guitar player. And so I was fortunate that I started doing some sound mixing for friends and realized I could certainly have as much impact on the way things sounded without actually having to be a part of it. So my failed career as a recording artist and a recording engineer and a guitarist and singer led me down a path of recording as a profession.
And you got your start working in some pretty iconic and big studios. I believe you worked at ABC, right? Before, yeah, and the Automat as well, Capitol Studios. How did you break into your work in those spaces? How did that kind of trajectory come about for you?
Well, I was working for ABC Records at the time. ABC at that time, of course, had their television network. They had a record label, and they had a recording studio. And I was working for the record label at the time in artist relations. And I was, doing live sound mixing at the same time. I had a live sound company with some friends of mine, and I thought it would be a good idea to try and get a job in the recording studio. I didn't think I was going to be a recording engineer. I was wanting to be a producer and an artist manager, but I thought I should learn something about recording in order to do that. So here, 40 plus years later, I am.
You are. That's beautiful. I love that. I do often, I similarly feel like sometimes it's the path you least expect that finds you, right? That you didn't necessarily set out to be a recording engineer, but you found your passion with it. Was there a particular project or maybe mentor or artist you were working with early on that was really influential for um, helping you realize that like this is where I want to be?
Uh, well, I think just as I got uh, into kind of working and doing recording sessions and sort of working my way up, it just became apparent that that was what I was going to do. And ultimately it was years before I actually produced a record, which is what I started out wanting to be. But you just keep trying to do the best job you can every day, and ask a lot of questions. And I've been very my path is somewhat different, not too different from people of my generation, because there were a lot of big studios and that's where most of us got our start. But I think that I've stayed in big studios my whole career. I've only been an independent for a very small part of my career. So, but I've always had mentors in every one of the studios that I've worked at. And, they've taken on sort of different roles, but I've always been lucky enough to work in places where there are people invested in my success and were willing to help me out.
Did you was that at the forefront of your mind when you were, looking at different studio moves at a certain point? Did you find yourself really gravitating towards, particular environments, particular mentors, like knowing that you wanted to work with this person, or knowing that you wanted to work in this particular space? Like, how did that kind of influence some of those decisions around some of your career moves?
Hmm. I don't think I ever thought of it like that. I mean, I think that I've always been very fortunate in my career when I was starting out doing setup or, making tape copies, which is what I did when I first started out, to, my first jobs as an assistant engineer. I was always very lucky then that I got to work with a very high caliber of other engineers and producers. And so, I tended to gravitate towards a certain type of music. I was doing a lot of R&B music, and with engineers like Lamont Dozier and the late Barney Perkins, um, and the head of A&R of ABC Records was always working there. And then Roy Halley, who is best known for his work with Simon and Garfunkel, came in as the new head of A&R and started doing all of his work in the studio. And I was lucky enough to be able to work with him on all of his projects. So in terms of an early mentor, I would probably point to Roy, and much of what I learned from him I still use.
That's beautiful. And I love the way you're pointing to also so much of this, as we know in this industry, is kind of around patience, being in the right place at the right time, taking, advantage of keeping open to opportunities. I'm
And
Carrie. Oh,
it's not,
please.
because I think there's a difference between being in the right place at the right time and being open to opportunities. If you're
Mm,
open to opportunities, then you're in the right place at the right time.
mm,
When to me, when one says you have to be in the right place at the right time, it's like all of a sudden something magically appears and you're at the affect of it. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think you're in the right place at the right time when you recognize an opportunity and you take the most advantage of it. Because there are plenty of opportunities out there. And if you choose not to recognize them, then, well, you've let that time pass. Um, so I differentiate between those two. Because if not, it's too easy to go, oh, gee, I just wasn't in the right place at the right time, and therefore I didn't get this or that.
Yeah, I love that distinction. Thank you for that because it really, I think what you're pointing to here critically is also it's one's personal, it's the mindset, right? The bravery a little bit, the like confidence to also hold your own and see those opportunities when they are coming your way. This you had a long career. This you I don't have to tell you this, this industry can be hard sometimes to keep up that sense of momentum for oneself or I'm sure you've probably felt maybe a little burned out at different points. How do you keep yourself going in those moments? Have you had any like I guess could be anything from like a little personal Leslie ritual that keeps you grounded or like peers that you like lean on when you're having, one of these instances where you just need to keep going. How have you kept your momentum up over all these years?
Well, it's funny. I wish I could say I like meditated or did, so I probably should. It would probably help me out a lot. Um, no, I think probably, I guess maybe the one thread that has gone through my life while having this career is trying to have a life at the same time and
Mhm.
not just feeling like my career was the end all and be all. And if I didn't work 24/7 and take everything, you know, as we're, very prone to do, as you know, recording engineers, we want all the experience and all of that. And at the same time, I think it's important to have relationships, to have friends, to you know go see live music, travel if you can. Some of that's of course not affordable for people when they're just starting out, but so much of that then I think can inform one's personality and how one approaches the art that they're working with by having all these experiences. If your only experience is going to be in the studio and in the control room, then really that's all you have to bring to the project. You don't really have um, kind of the rest of the life that you're living and your experiences to bring as well. And I think that's why a lot of my clients are just friends of mine. We have worked so closely together, and we have developed relationships that sort of supersede our working relationships. Some I don't even work with anymore, but I'm still friends with them and see them often. And so
Yeah.
I just have found that that's very important to me. It's probably just because I'm so damn interested in so many things that
No, but that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense for any creative space. If you only stay in one lane, you're not gonna pick up all that life and the world has to offer. And we talk around here a lot too for folks who are starting out around, you're looking for an internship, you're looking to break into being someone's assistant. And often what we hear the mentors say is something along the lines of, think about what you are also bringing to the room. It's not just about what I'm giving you, but also what you are bringing to the table. And I think you're also touching on a kind of an interesting point of that, where we're always trying to define what the je ne sais quoi is, right? It's not necessarily your logic skills or your Pro Tools skills, it's also about your life experience skills or what your perspective is that you're bringing to the room as well. Would you say that that's true in
Oh,
terms of like your assistants and things? Yeah.
yeah, I would say that that's definitely true. You know,
Yeah. What's the you talked about kind of like how you've built great relationships with artists and creators over the years and they've become friends and that those peer connections that are so fruitful and necessary for building your career. I'm curious, what is the vibe you try to create when you're in the studio with one of these with one of your artists? Like what's your Leslie-ness?
funny. I don't know. You'd have to ask my clients, and the people I work with, what my vibe is. I don't know. I like to have fun. I mean, you're working in a environment that's has a lot of built-in tension in it, and a lot of built-in money, and not to mention creativity, and artists bearing their soul in front of people that they've perhaps never met before in a strange environment. And so I think I learned this a lot, just from the very start. And this is again the benefit of working in multi-room facilities where you are working with different clients every day, different engineers, different producers. Everybody has their own needs and wants and their own personalities. And, you're, in the end, I mean, yeah, I have 7 Grammys, but I'm in the customer service business. Regardless of what I've done in my career and how many awards I have, my job is to make somebody feel completely comfortable when they come in, and not have them be concerned about anything other than really, sharing their art and feeling comfortable in doing that. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess if I bring anything to it, and that's, I mean, I didn't come out of the womb with that. I mean, it's not like I walked into my first studio job and that was that. But you just kind of figure at some point what people need and how to make that work given what your particular talents are at the time, what you know, what you don't know. Um, Surrounding I've always surrounded myself with people that know more than I do. And some people don't like to do that because they feel that it makes them feel less than, but it makes me feel like I can learn more, and be more creative in what I do. And but having fun, being able to crack jokes and laugh, and I think that's also a big part of what I bring.
Absolutely. That it's trust building right there. That makes sense. And for someone to bear their soul, you got to be able to sometimes crack a joke. I like it.
Sometimes, particularly with your working for certain clients, that's helped diffuse situations. Particularly in the early days where clients were not comfortable working with a female assistant or a female engineer, and perhaps they felt like they had to change their language, or their tone, or they might feel uncomfortable about not being able to be themselves. And, I mean, I'll be honest, I would find the appropriate time to use the F word just to diffuse the, situation. Not that I was trying to be one of the guys, but it like, I can,
I can hang, I can be here, you can be yourself. Yeah.
and you can be yourself and I can be myself. And you know, uh, it's just, sometimes you just find yourself in situations like, like
Mm, mm, mm. I'm curious, you've worked across film, music, gaming. Do you find how does the your process, perhaps let's start there, in the studio maybe vary when you are in working on one of these different kinds of processes, like and projects. You know, they're very different industries as well, film and music, but there are some things that are also evergreen in that. So I'm curious how you felt the dynamics change for yourself and your craft in the studio.
Hmm. Well, there are definitely different requirements of me and the staff I work with, uh, given the genre we're working on, given what the end result is going to be, what the format might be, and uh, there are, as you put it, evergreen things. I mean, you know, sound hits a microphone and gets recorded, and it comes out of speakers, and it either sounds okay or it doesn't. And I mean, that never changes. That I don't care what you're doing. So if you start from there, then it's just a matter of trying to adapt that to uh, the genre that you're working with, whether it be video games, film scores, records. I don't do commercials anymore, but any kind of scoring work that has visual media, even that has its own idiosyncrasies. Video games are not the same as film scores, and they're not the same as TV scores. So they all have their own special needs and requirements, and the language might also be different that you might use between all of them. You wouldn't use the same language necessarily for doing a score for visual media as you would by making a record. There is no chorus and bridge in a 3-minute orchestra piece, um, and yet you don't have you know 3 movements in a record unless it's a classical record. So um, so there are many things that are true in all of those, and then there are the unique things that you learn about doing each one of those. The client needs are definitely different. Film scores tend to have many more people involved in them, from the director to the composer, obviously, the film editor, producers, things like that, whereas video game scores might have 4 different composers on one game. um, so it's just different, and you kind of learn what's required for each of them.
I'm curious this is more on the career side of being able to balance working across these different industries. And as you so aptly pointed out, like from your perspective in some of the day to day, when you're putting a mic to an instrument, it's going to be the same regardless of what the output is. But some of um, the, the people in the room are different, the clients are different. And it's a lot to kind of like it's balance across these different tiers. Have you ever felt like pressure to silo yourself more specifically in music or in, recorded music, that is to say records, versus um, film versus TV versus games? Or do you feel like being able to translate across all of those has been um, seamless for you to be able to balance from a career perspective?
Well, I don't know if I would consider it seamless, but again, I think that that's the advantage of starting out like I did, where I was working on different projects every day. And so that just kind of came with the territory, and although I must say I wasn't doing any real classical work until I came to Skywalker. I was doing a lot of orchestra stuff for scores when I was at Capitol, which is where I was before Skywalker. I was doing a lot of big band things and um, records, but um, yeah, just it's. I mean, at Capitol they had rebuilt the two main studios to and all of a sudden we were getting in a lot of film and TV um, music work that we hadn't gotten in before. And that, as I mentioned earlier, that just required a whole different language because, I was still assisting a lot then. And the engineers would come in and would just use different terms for different things, or the composers would, things that I wasn't necessarily used to. And so, lucky enough for me, UCLA had an extension course on film sound from beginning to end. And I decided to take that so that I could learn more about what that language was, what the process was. If somebody said, Q41 or, used other terms like that, that I would know what they were talking about, that I knew what would happen to the music when it left the studio and went on to whatever happened next. And that was very beneficial to me. So, but then by the time I got into doing my own film scores and video games and stuff, I felt really comfortable doing that.
I love that. So your perspective, it sounds like, is also one of you started kind of being able to work across a bunch of different streams, and you've held on to that as a core piece of your identity as a creator behind the board.
You're I and you I think I didn't really answer the initial part of your question, which was, about if I ever felt like I wanted to gravitate to one particular area or another. I mean, I could do big band music for the rest of my life, and I'd be perfectly happy. But having said that, um, no, and I think that I was lucky in that I was never typecast in anything in particular, although now I'm probably more typecast in classical and acoustic music. But I'm really glad I had all that experience because I have a very wide taste in music, and which does come from when I was growing up. So, there's certain kinds of music I wouldn't do because I wouldn't be the best person for them, like, a rock date or, heavy metal or, dates like that. And I was never exposed to that anyway. So, but no, I never felt like I had one particular lane I wanted to follow. It's been great to
Mm.
up every day and maybe do something new.
I love that. You mentioned that you feel like maybe now if anything, you might be typecast in the classical world. I'm curious, do you feel like that is in part if the industry has changed at all with some of these, like if you feel like in the earlier parts of your career, it was more like anything goes, and now there's more pressure for folks to compartmentalize at all.
Um, well, I don't know if there's more pressure to. I mean, but I do think that in this particular era that we're in now, with so many songwriter producers, um, that it seems inevitable that one might get typecast by working with a particular person. And I don't mean typecast in a bad way, but they, become the person that you don't think you could do this project without, because they're so good at what they do. I mean, I'm thinking of somebody like Laura Sisk, who
Right.
works with Antonoff and works with a lot of other people, and she has just found this fantastic niche in what she does, and has become the person that people can't live without who work with those kinds of artists. So I don't think it's typecasting in uh, a bad way. Um, but I do think it's just a kind of a function of the business that we have now,
Mm.
where you might get kind of associated with a particular type of music or a particular uh, producer, singer, songwriter, or something like that. And then it might be difficult to break out of that, you know, if particularly if something happens to that person, and I don't mean something bad, but say that person no longer is the flavor of the month, and you've invested all your time and energy in being that that person's go-to person, you know. So I'm sure there's an art in how to, develop yourself so that your whole career doesn't fall apart when theirs does. But
Mm,
that's not
mm.
the answer.
Um, this is shifting gears a little bit, but I want to talk about your work as an innovator in the field. You've always followed innovation in your career. You moved to San Francisco and you worked on one of the early digital recording systems there, if I'm not mistaken. You've also won a Grammy for Best Immersive Work. You've really kind of always kept your finger on the pulse, it seems, on what's happening in sound and in recording and what you can be doing to advance or be a part of the forefront of the newest technologies. I'm curious, like, what's driven you as an innovator in this space, or why has that always felt important to you, maybe in your work?
Well, I don't know if I would consider myself an innovator. I mean, I certainly haven't necessarily created anything. I mean, probably my biggest innovation is just trying to keep up because, things change so rapidly. And, when I think on all the formats that I've worked with through my career, having to, between, analog tape machine aligning to making digital copies and having all the settings right and, you know, um, just kind of all of that. I don't I don't think I'm necessarily an innovator, but I do enjoy trying new things and I'm given a lot of opportunities to do that as well. Again, it just gets back to, taking the opportunities that are given to you and trying to make the most of them. There's certainly, lots of stuff I don't know that I just chosen not to learn, because there's only so much I think that is really um, important to my ultimate interaction with the client and me trying to do the best job that I can do. And, at some point you have to pick and choose that you can't know everything, you know, and, um, and, uh, I mean, MIDI is a perfect example of that. When MIDI became really popular and everybody was connecting keyboards and sequencers and all that stuff, I mean, obviously I had that experience working with Herbie Hancock. But then when I got to um, Capital and people were doing that, I thought, I really do not need to know anything about MIDI. There are plenty of people I can hire if I need to. There are people that come in with the keyboard players, people with the composers that have their own assistants. I don't really need to know that. And I just chose to kind of shut that out of what I was doing. And I've never looked back and thought, oh, gee, I really missed that opportunity.
Mhm. It's sometimes worthwhile to, yeah, know that you can't. I love that. Know that you can't know everything. So sometimes you embrace where you're at. Um, I'm curious because you've worked across so many different formats from analog, digital, immersive. This might be a loaded question, but do you have a preference for your ears? What you love, like, you have your turntable behind you. What sounds best to you?
Um, it's really interesting. I've gone through this kind of uh, I don't know, sort of revelation about vinyl recently because I've been going through my vinyl collection, listening to things that perhaps I only have on vinyl that I never bought on CD, just to see if it's even the kind of music that I would want to keep any longer, that I would actually put on more than once in 10 years. Um, and certainly more, and not necessarily for nostalgic reasons. Oh, I remember what I was doing when I played this record the first time. But because I really love the music, and it's very interesting. I've noticed, uh, and it could just be the way records were cut that day. But our ears are now so accustomed to um, digital, preferably good digital. For all of you, I would highly all of you, I would highly discourage MP3s. But we're used to this really nice full low end now. Um, and I'm not talking about like a screaming kick drum on 11, but just a nice full warm all embracing sound that, you know, you listen back to LPs now, and because of the way records have to be cut with not as much low end, or the needle would skip out of the grooves, um, it doesn't have that nice warm thing. It has a definitely different sound to it. And so I think it just interesting that our ears have gotten used to a certain kind of sonic profile. And now, at least when I go back to vinyl, I'm enjoying the music a lot, but the sonic profile is not necessarily what I'm used to. And I've been thinking recently of calling some current record cutters just to see what they're doing, because everybody's using the same masters. I mean, some people do make a different master for vinyl than they make for digital, but I'd be like um, curious to talk to some people about how they're cutting records now to make them sound more like what our brains tell us sound should sound like, because a lot of that comes from our brain. It doesn't come from our ears at all.
Mm, mm. That's so interesting that you're pointing towards warmth specifically, because I feel like one thing that, you know, some classic vinyl audiophiles will also often say is that they feel that vinyl is more warm in a very nebulous way, right? Like I think warmth gets turned into a really nebulous term. So I think that's really fascinating the way you're actually pinpointing a sort of warmth that that you can feel or sense in the digital files actually, as opposed to these analog LPs. That's very interesting.
Yeah, well, that's sort of warm, as you say, very kind of amorphous, generic thing, and nobody really knows what that means. And and yeah, they are. When I play my records, they are warmer things, feel a bit more homogenized, but there's also a lack of really uh, uh, top end. There's also a lack of that real kind of low end that I'm speaking of. So it might be warmth because it's more the absence of certain things than it is the fact that it has something extra to it.
Mhm.
So anyway, I'll get back to you when I talk to
We're gonna have
people,
to have a second webinar combo just on that one.
and you can post it on your website and whatever.
We'll call in Piper Payne and Emily Lazar on that one. That sounds good. Um, well, we're gonna get ready for Q&A soon. So folks, if you want to start putting your questions in the chat, or you can put them in the Q&A box, I will see either. As folks are getting started with doing that, I'd love to kind of talk about, you mentioned also in this conversation on innovation, you with MIDI in particular, like hiring people or bringing folks onto your team with different skill sets that, and what you look for when you're kind of like have had opportunities for connecting with different folks. For those folks who are starting out, what advice might you have for like what you look for when you are bringing people or have hired folks onto your teams, or like when you're getting cold outreach from folks who are wanting to talk to you for mentorship, or maybe it's for an internship. What are you seeing work well for folks, or what pitfalls maybe do you see on the other side of that spectrum?
Well, I think mm, I think it matters little how well you know an SSL or a Neve console because you're not going to be the one sitting at the board the first day you walk in, you know. Um, and no matter how many hours you spend on that at whatever school you went to, or uh, however you learned, the craft that you're doing, um, I think way more important are people skills, life experience, of course, experience in the studio so that you know what a patch bay looks like if you've been lucky enough to work in the studio with a patch bay, um, so that you're comfortable with all of those things. But that kind of upper, level, I know I'm, know this back and forth and that back and forth. I think um, being uh, being Pro Tools certified is probably very important now. I think if you were wanting to work in classical, learning Pyramix is also very important. So, if I were looking for someone, I would be looking for, um, life experience. I'd be looking for um, someone who is well rounded in terms of the music that they've worked on. Um, I tend, people send me demos of here's what I've done. I don't even listen to them, quite frankly. I mean, I hate to say that, but it doesn't tell me anything about who you are. It doesn't tell me anything about um, how you're going to relate to the clients, because you're not going to get a job as an engineer. You're going to get a job at whatever it is starting out, you know. And so, those are the things that are important to me. And, also that being wanting to kind of stay after school and learn things and ask questions. That's the most important thing. We're we're not very um, impressed with people who don't ask questions when they have the opportunity and they're sitting in a world-class recording studio with very talented people.
Hmm. Um, we have a question. What skill or mindset do you think separates a good engineer from a truly great one? Is there any particular project, maybe from your own past, that you worked on that like really changed how you thought about sound and maybe took you from the next level from like good to great from your own perspective, even how you were feeling about your craft?
Oh, what an interesting question. I think that the kind of management skills, and I don't mean, filing and penmanship, although I do think penmanship's important, particularly when you go through some of the old analog tape boxes I've gone through and you can't read anything. Um, the equivalent of that is the titles you put in your files. Uh, the uh, I think it's when all of a sudden you realize that some of the skills that you've learned you can now kind of bring in and have the bandwidth to learn something else. And there might be a million things going on at the same time, and you might be doing a rhythm section with a full orchestra, or five opera singers and an orchestra and a chorus, and um, I think it's really being able to manage that with the same kind of skill that you can manage a string quartet. I don't. I don't really know how to answer the question about what the between being a good engineer and a great engineer. Some of that is opportunity. Some of that that opportunity allows you to develop the skills that might make you a great engineer. If you don't ever have those opportunities, um, you don't, you might not be able to make that leap. And, I think, and this doesn't has nothing to do with your question either, but I've always thought over the years when I've been, interviewed about, why aren't there more women engineers? And glad I don't get that question that much anymore. But it's very hard, I think, in the age that I grew up in to be able to go from being an assistant engineer to sitting in the big chair because we make such great assistant engineers. We become the people that people can't live without. We pay attention, we go out and fix somebody's headphones before we're asked. You know, make notes that people can read. We're always ahead of things. And it's really hard to give that up on someone and let them, move to the big chair. But all of those skills are as appropriate for that as as ever. So I think a lot of it is really how one works with people. I mean, of course, it's the sound somebody gets. If you don't get great sounds, you're never going to go anywhere. Um, you know, so, but there are a lot of engineers who get great sounds that are just end up being, you know, good engineers and can't make that next leap.
Mm, mm.
I think
Um,
the thing for me, quite honestly, is that leap for me just became because I also work with clients that, like, I work with a lot of producers who aren't really, uh, don't know really anything about music. They might be the artist manager. They might be there because they're the composer and are producing the session because of that. So I tend to work with a lot of people who, or have worked, I should say, in my career with a lot of people where I know way more than they do. And there's a fine art of fitting in what I know it while deferring to them at the same time. And so I think the end result of that is that I have made those producers feel comfortable about working with me. And then I go on to their next project and their next project, and they're always working with really great people. So sometimes it just can be your social skills or your studio skills.
on a sort of similar note, we've got a couple of questions around like that transition point. You were pointing towards the transition point from assistant to the big chair, but in a similar fashion, if you've been working in a home studio to working in a professional studio, when you're working as an independent producer engineer to really trying to level up the types of clients you might be working with, and do you have advice for um, striking the right balance between showing your expertise, as you say? There might be opportunities where you actually have more experience than others in the room, but you're kind of creating the right balance. Or on the flip side, perhaps not like overdoing it with your expertise and like being like the sweet spot between how you communicate that you've got skills and you've got that confidence and you're ready for that next step in and career building from there. Do you have any advice on that?
Boy, every situation is different, you know, and it's the flip of a coin whether you're going to piss somebody off by them thinking you know more than they do and embarrassing them, or whether they're going to really welcome that, you know. And uh, I really think it's about, you know, I would have to say they're, being the sort of lifelong learner that I am, and being comfortable with what I don't know, that I rarely come into situations where I know more than anybody else in the room about something. And so I think that in some ways keeps me a little more on the humble side so that I can lean over to the producer and say, um, you know, do you think, maybe the drums and piano aren't quite together there? Should we take a listen to that one more time? and let them make the decision and say, sure, let's hear it back, and we'll hear it back. And of course, it's the drums and piano. We're not together at the same time, but that's not my, you know, job to get on the talk back because it's not my recording session, you know. And I just think that, you know, that those are all kind of learned experiences. I will say, you know, you mentioned going from working in a home studio to, you know, okay, now you've got your shot, you get to work at a full service recording studio, you know. I had an interesting situation with that. We do a number of high school and symphony youth orchestras at Skywalker, and we had a new one come in, and they were planning to come in, and they had never experienced being in a recording studio before. And the artistic director conductor, because we were talking about some of the other ones we had coming up with other schools, and he said, would it be okay for me to just come in and, you know, be a fly on the wall on those and just sort of see, you know, how that goes and all of that. And no one had ever really said that in terms of their own um, learning experience. And so that might be worthwhile for someone to do if they um, haven't been in a real studio in years, because that was when they were in school, and now they've been, you know, at home working and don't, and, you know, have their cat to talk to, and they don't have, you know, an assistant engineer or studio manager or, you know, anybody live, to just, you know, ask the studio that you're going to be working at, do you mind if I, you know, hang out for a day on something else that you're working on, so that I can, you know, just sort of, you know, see how things go. And I'm sure,
Absorb. Yeah.
unless a client that, you know, would not be welcome for that, I think that would be a great way to then feel more comfortable when you come in and understand the dynamic in the room and all
Um, Shifting gears, we've got a question on like what was the most difficult challenge or setback you maybe have experienced in your career, and how did you overcome it?
that. Well, I think probably, uh, I mean, I could cite two things. I was fired from a recording session early on, um, because I answered the phone in the control room, and it was the artist's wife. And when she found out that there was another woman in the control room, she called my boss, who managed the studio, and asked for me to be taken off the recording session. Now I know that sounds crazy now, uh, but you know, when my boss hired me for this being my first job, he had a female mastering engineer, but there was almost no one doing what I was doing. So we kind of both that something might happen, you know, and we're taking the attitude, you know, well, we'll see how it goes and see what comes up. And so, um, yeah, but you know, I guess because we just sort of figured, well, it, you know, it always happen, and it might happen. It just, you know, I just went on and did what else I did, and you know, fortunately, that was the only time that had happened. But I think the biggest challenge was when I had a bicycle accident and had a concussion, and I wasn't able to drive for 6 months, and I was recuperating from home. And you know, when you have a head trauma, your ears can suffer trauma as well, because there are all these little hair follicles in your ears that are vibrating, picking up the sounds, and they can get concussed as well. And I thought I was going to, that my hearing was going to be impaired forever. And I remember sitting in my living room at the time talking to a good friend of mine, and you know, just sort of, you know, wondering what I would do if I had to stop them. And you know, this was kind of at the beginning of my career at Skywalker, so it was probably, oh, 15 years ago now that that happened. But, you know, I mean, that was um, a bit of a setback, but, eventually I figured out a way to get to work every day and, and moved on and fortunately got my hearing back. So.
Would you say in both of those scenarios, it sounds like, thank you first off for sharing those personal stories. I feel like you've touched on something really lovely here, which is also sometimes you just have to kind of keep going. The answer is really when dealing with a setback is to just, in a way, keep swimming. You have to just not let it, you just have to keep going. Would you say that that was true?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's there's going to be lots of setbacks, gigs that you don't get and people that you don't necessarily get along with. There's, all kinds of things that might not necessarily go your way. And um, we all have to accept our personal responsibility in that. It's not always somebody else's fault and we're perfect. Um, but if it's something that you want, you just find a way to keep going. I mean, as they say, get back on the horse that threw you. But you just you know, you tend to gravitate towards the right people to work with. And, I mean, in the case of the very white thing, I mean, that was an extraneous thing. There's nothing I could have done about that. It wasn't my fault. I just happened to be in the room, it was really all about them. And so,
Yeah, you just nothing you can do. Well, we're at 3:59. I want to be mindful of your time. Thank you so much for joining us. As we wrap up, I know we had some questions we weren't able to get to everyone. Thank you for joining and submitting today. As we close out, Leslie, do you have any parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with this afternoon?
God, that's a hard question. No, I think, um, just wake up every day trying to figure out how to make it a better day than yesterday.
That's a perfect words of wisdom. I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's convo. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Friday. For more conversations like this, please feel free to check out We Are Moving the Needle's YouTube channel and follow us on socials, sign up for our newsletter. We've got scholarships, we've got grants. Get involved. We'd love to see you.